Have you run into any
Turned out
situations
pretty good.
where a, something was bricked, whether it's a board or a keyboard, and it just there was no way that you could work out how to recover it. It was just e-waste at that point.
Um, there there have been some bricks that unfortunately I don't have the hardware to
Right.
reverse engineer and try and figure out at this point.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things that was supported were like there's a whole bunch of low cost keyboards on the market, RGB keyboards,
Hmm.
and a lot of them have really terrible firmware. Uh, there for a while there were ones called eVision, and that was
E-vision.
like the dominant chip in the you wouldn't find any keyboard labeled eVision, but
Right.
it
Right.
was the chip that was being used in
Okay.
a lot of
Okay.
them. So ones from like Red Dragon were
Ah. Okay.
using
Yeah. Yeah.
these chips,
I have a Red Dragon
and
keyboard sitting in the cupboard right now.
yeah, so those actually turned out to be okay because I actually found that some other people were trying to port QMK to this chip, like the open source keyboard firmware.
Okay.
Yeah, so I joined in on that project and wrote like an LED driver to get the backlights working and got
Hmm.
them working in OpenRGB once that project kind of came together.
Hmm. Hmm.
I did a YouTube video about that, about how to put like custom firmware on the Red Dragon keyboards. And actually, they went from being cheap, kind of bad keyboards to actually being, at least from a software perspective, very nice keyboards once you had good firmware on them. And then what did Red Dragon do? They went and they switched the chip out because on the same product lines. It was,
I'm
to be
guessing
fair, it
without
was
a
when
rename
COVID
then.
happened. No, no rename. I mean, it was whenever the supply chain issues started
Right.
happening.
Okay. That makes
They
sense.
went to a cheaper chip, and it was a completely different architecture, and the firmware was completely different.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so for whatever reasons, some of those keyboards would brick, and so I had to pull the support for that controller in OpenRGB, just take it out
Hmm.
so that it wasn't bricking keyboards. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people who had those keyboards ran into a bricking issue with them.
Hmm.
And because they're so cheap and Red Dragon doesn't have any documentation or firmware, uh, we weren't able to figure out. I did end up eventually getting one, and I got a programmer for it, but I haven't had a chance to like dump the firmware from it. So
Hmm. Hmm.
hopefully we can figure out a way to recover those. But I think my takeaway from that is to stay away from like the really cheap boards.
Hmm.
Get something that has decent firmware. I mean, if it has a good, well, even if it's a bloated, ugly piece of software for Windows, at least it has some sort of software
Hmm. Hmm.
that we can take advantage of, and some sort of firmware we can take advantage of. That's not going to be really terrible.
Well, Red Dragon's a
Um,
really interesting company. I'm sure there are other ones like it, but
there are, yeah.
this is a Logitech G915. This is a really nice keyboard. I like
Mm-hmm.
this.
Yeah.
My other keyboard is a from Red Dragon is a identical clone of this without the Logitech logo. Like they know what they're
Yeah.
doing. They know the market they're trying to get into. They make these like this is a at full price. This is like a $300 keyboard in Australia. I, I bought it
Yeah.
half price, but the Red Dragon
Mm-hmm.
one is like it's like $80 and it does
Right.
90% of what this does. So if you're someone who's
Right.
like looking for a keyboard, like they've managed to fit themselves into the into that market without making keyboards that are so terrible they just fall apart. They
Right.
get most
Yeah,
of the way
their
there.
build quality is decent. Yeah.
Mhm.
And well, whenever we had the ability to flash the custom firmware to them, I was really liking Red Dragon. I would
Mhm.
recommend them any day of the week because, yeah, their keyboards were like $30 to $40 here in the
Mhm.
US, compared to like the 80 or 90 to $100 like Razors and Corsairs, Logitechs. And their build quality was pretty decent. Like the K556 I had,
Mhm.
metal construction, um, swappable key
Mhm.
switches, all kinds of stuff. It was a pretty nice keyboard. Just I was hindered by the firmware that came on the microcontroller
Mhm. Mhm.
inside of it. If you wanted to use it for Open RGB, but once we put custom firmware on there, it really made a nice keyboard. So I was really disappointed whenever they did the microcontroller swap
Mhm.
because now they're pretty useless for Open RGB. Um, Although this keyboard is an AOC that I just picked up.
Mhm.
I didn't even know they made keyboards, but then I saw it at Micro Center, and it was like a $30, $25 to $30 keyboard. And I thought, this is just going to be some like Red Dragon-ish Chinese, like, well, they're all Chinese probably, but low quality chip. And from like SinoWealth is the chip that is infamous for being bricked on that particular chip. Like the eVision was good, the SinoWealth is bad. I thought it was just gonna be that, but no, it actually turned out to be like they have their own software ecosystem, and they have like they can sync the different devices. And whenever they do that, that's good for us because that means it's going to have an interface to control the keys from software directly. And it turned out to be that. And this is actually a really good board for that price. So I've been super happy with this board.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a AOC. I think it's a GK 500 or something like that.
I'm not in the market for a new keyboard. If someone wants to grab one and wants to, mess around with it, hey, it's supported with OpenRGB now, so.
Yep. I mean, I have much nicer keyboards than this, but for the price, I'm pretty happy with this one. So.